Hello, this is Blue Joe Saunders, WBO middleweight champion of the world. Subscribe to Sport and Icons to stay in touch with all the top news. God bless you all.
So something that I've never done before, and I never really had too much intention of doing so, it is a pound for pound list. And for a couple of reasons are, number one, it doesn't matter what list you put out, it's never quite going to be satisfying for everybody. Okay, but hopefully the list that I have, some of you guys will agree that some of them should be at least in the top 10, etc. But of course, most of it is subjective. We always hear that. And with pound for pound, it's a phantom entity that I don't really believe that really exists, if you know what I mean. As in, there's no correct way of scoring. And now some people live and breathe it, you know, and I have no reason to doubt their list. And I don't disagree with anybody's list, really. But there's some things that my criteria for a pound for pound list is purely different to other people, supposedly. Or anyway, so my criteria straight off is that they have to have had a minimum of 3 fights in the last 24 months. So the last 2 years. And the reason for that is that the fighter of, say, 3 years ago may not be the same fighter now. So how can you put them on a pound for pound list when they could be slowly dropping off, if that makes sense? So for me, it has to have at least 3 fights in the last 24 months. Ideally 4, but of course I'm allowing for injuries, that kind of thing. So, and also I am going to throw in, while it's not a massive criteria, I am going to, of course, look at some of their history as well. Now, just because somebody may have like 5 losses on their record, if it happened in the earlier part of their career, but have been rising rapidly over the last couple of years, then I'm going to kind of like overlook the fact that they took some earlier losses. But equally, I'm also going to look at the fact that they have actually been moving up in weight, all these kind of things as well. And also, I've put no heavyweights on this because that pretty much goes against, if you like, some reasons for a pound for pound, right? And again, I don't feel too comfortable about putting cruiserweight on there, but just for this one, I am going to. So that should probably give you a good indication where some of this list is going to go for. Also, I haven't put anybody on there for who weighs 122 pounds or below, purely because I'm not too confident about, not necessarily some of the main fighters there, but the people around them, if that makes sense, because I don't know enough about the people around them to really make a judgment as to, are they fighting the best people? Are they doing all that they can? So that's why I didn't look at 122 and below. So again, somebody like Moonsri, who is currently 49-0, you could probably argue that maybe he should be on a pound for pound list because he's 49-0. And when he takes on his next opponent in, what, 2 weeks' time, he'll be 50-0. So he's going to equal Floyd Mayweather's record. But the trouble is, I don't know enough around the people around him. You know, Yamanaka, and I don't know if he's a legitimate good champion, and maybe he should be calling him out or whatever. But of course, he has taken on, in his last couple of fights, have been 6 rounders. So I think it's the last 6 fights, 3 of those have only been 6 rounders, and for a WBC champion, for me, that's not good enough. And there are some other things as well. Now, as we go along, I will be doing some notable mentions as well. And at the very, very end as well, I will also do some honourable mentions as well as to why these people could potentially be on the list, but are not currently on my list right now for top 10. And again, a lot of these are actually going to be fighting each other. So my current list could change very, very quickly over the next couple of months for certain fighters fighting other fighters, where that win would propel them, not just 1 or 2 places, but could actually propel them quite a few places. But anyway, I'll kind of try and touch on that as we go. So in at number 10, I have Murat Gassiev. Now, Gassiev, obviously, he's in the World Super Series of Boxing right now at cruiserweight. And I do feel that if he was to beat Alexander Usyk next and become undisputed, that is one hell of an achievement. So while I may have him as number 10 right now, a win over Usyk would propel him quite a few places on my list, that is for sure. Now, at the minute, he is 26-0, he is undefeated, but as I said, I'm just looking at the last 2 years. So this is pretty much my criteria, and in the last 2 years, he has had 4 fights. And the last 3 were all decent opposition, of course. Denis Lebedev, who was also a champion, but is now being relegated to a regular champion. But again, after then, he did fight a guy who I can't even pronounce his damn name, but this was the opening of the World Boxing Super Series in Krzysztof Wlodarczyk. Don't know. I'm not an expert on cruiserweight, but allegedly this was a very, very good win, and it was for the IBF World Cruiserweight title, which of course was what Gassy was bringing into the tournament. But either way, he beats him on 3 rounds by knockout. Then straight after then, arguably a favourite for the tournament, or potentially for a lot of people, was Cuba's own Unir Dortugas, who was undefeated 22-0, and Gassy did excellent in that fight. Now, I'm not saying Dortugas didn't, but Gassy had the right game plan, come in at the right time, and ultimately stopped him in the final round as well, to not only retain his IBF, but to grab the WBA as well. Because in round number 12, he knocked him down twice and ultimately stopped him in round number 12, which is very, very unfortunate. Just 1 more minute and Dortugas would have made it to the very, very end. But either way, Gassy showed a huge, huge amount of skill from Russia, and only 24 years old as well. So next up, he's going to be taking on Alexander Usyk, which will be on the 11th of May. So roll on for that one. And as I said, a win over Usyk would propel him from number 10, probably, arguably top 5 maybe. But we'll have to wait and see, because obviously there's some other fights around that's going to be happening that could shift a few things around. So anyway, Murat Gassiev is my number 10. Number 9, Alexander Usyk, which would be Gassiev's opponent. Now, Usyk currently 14-0, and out of his 14 wins, 11 of those by knockout. And of course, if you look at a bit of history as well, obviously you look at the Olympics and his amateur career as well, absolutely phenomenal. And over the last 24 months, he has had 5 fights. And obviously some of them are against some pretty stellar opposition as well. And you could go back to Krzysztof Glowacki as well, where he won his WBO cruiserweight title. And Glowacki was a undefeated cruiserweight as well. Now, since then, he did beat a guy who had 2 losses on his record in Buchuno, but don't know enough about him to really rate it. But straight after then, he did beat an undefeated fighter in Michael Hunter. Now, he was 12-0, so again, he was pretty early in his career. But of course, Alexander Usyk is also very early in his career. He's still learning as a pro, and yes, there is a big difference between amateur and pro, that is for sure. Amateurs just prepares you for pro career, of course. But then he enters the World Boxing Super Series and puts his WBO World Cruiserweight title on the line against Marco Huck. Again, this guy, he had a record of 40 wins, 4 losses and 1 draw. Now, Marco Huck, of course, is a quality fighter. And he dealt with him quite comfortably in this fight and ultimately stopped him in round number 12. And then since then, he went on and he fought Marius Bradis in a very, very close fight. And I know some people are a bit contentious as to whether it was close, whether some people say Bradis won this one, or some people say it was a clear victory for Usyk. But either way, the records show that Alexander Usyk beat Marius Bradis. Now again, Marius Bradis is an honourable mention in this list as well, but he hasn't made my top 10 purely because he lost. And while a loss doesn't always define you, of course not, but for me, I think that because Alexander Usyk became a unified cruiserweight champion there, he definitely deserves a mention in the top 10. So Alexander Usyk is my number 9, but again, a win over Murat Gassiev will propel him quite high, just like it would with Gassiev. So at number 9, we have Alexander Usyk, and in at number 8, Errol Spence Jr. Now, Errol Spence Jr., obviously his biggest win of his career was when he came over to fight Kell Brook for the IBF. Of course, Kell Brook had just come off of a loss, of course, and it was a freak injury that ultimately stopped Kell Brook from making it to the end, but because he got injured in round number 6, he did go 5 rounds fighting Errol Spence with one eye, and because of that, Errol Spence was overtaking him on the points anyway, so I think that Errol Spence would have won on points anyway. But had the eye injury not happened, who knows what would have happened. My honest opinion is Kell Brook would have won. But either way, Errol Spence Jr. over the last 2 years has fought 4 times. And I kind of wish that he'd been a bit more active over the last 12 months since he won the title from Kell Brook. But that is what it is. But of course, in the last 2 years, he's beaten some relatively decent opposition. Chris Algieri, again, he's a small guy. He's a 140 fighter, really. But he dealt with Chris Algieri very comfortably, knocked him out in 5 rounds. And of course, Leonard Bundu as well, knocked him out in 6 rounds straight after then, where Leonard Bundu had only had 1 loss prior to that one. Then, of course, came the Kell Brook fight, and then he was out for quite a while, and he just didn't defend his IBF title. But when he did, he was calling out some of the top guys. He's been calling out Keith Thurman. He's been calling out Danny Garcia. So he wanted a top defense, but ultimately nobody really wanted to have anything to do with him, which is why he gets like an extra point or 2, because people just don't want to fight him because he's that dangerous. And ultimately he took on Lamont Peterson. Again, not the biggest stellar name in the world, but still very, very good, and arguably the top ranked fighter on the IBF list. Of course, the IBF list isn't the best in the world, but he was the best of a very bad bunch of them, if you like. But he dealt with him quite comfortably in 7 rounds. Of course, he does have a mandatory defense, as a lot of you guys will be seeing that the IBF do put their mandatories as a high priority. And sometimes you don't particularly want to see these fights, but that comes at a price for being the IBF champion. So either way, Errol Spence Jr., who is a very, very dangerous southpaw and one hell of a body puncher, makes it onto my list as number 8. But again, hopefully we're going to end up seeing him in a unification against maybe the winner of Crawford and Jeff Horn, or ultimately Keith Thurman at some point as well. So again, these things could change quite comfortably, quite easily. Now, number 7, and this is going to cause a little bit of a few eyebrows raised, if you like, because I have from Northern Ireland, Ryan Burnett. Ryan Burnett is a unified champion. Well, I say unified. He did unify, but ultimately had his IBF taken away from him because he had a choice: fight the IBF mandatory or fight the WBA mandatory. Ultimately, he chose the WBA, so ended up getting stripped of his IBF. But in the last 2 years, he's fought 6 times and come from relatively nowhere, trained by Adam Booth. And not only did he become the IBF champion by beating Lee Haskins, he didn't just sit on the title, he went and unified straight away against Zakyanov and ended up winning the WBA title. And as I said, straight after then, he had a choice: IBF mandatory or WBA mandatory. He chose WBA and ended up beating Jan-Fres Perejo. Now, of course, he didn't look stellar in all these fights. He is still learning. I mean, he's 25 years old. But based on what he's achieved coming from nowhere in such a short period of time, at this age as well, for me, he deserves at least a top 10. That is for sure. But, of course, if some people want to have him on their top 15 or top 20, okay, fair enough. I'm not really going to argue with that, but being a unified bantamweight champion in a division that is pretty good, I think, with the likes of Tete in there as well. Now, again, honourable mention, here we come, of Solani Tete. For me, he hasn't done enough in the last 2 years to really warrant him being on there. He has only fought 3 times, but if I was to match him against Ryan Burnett, I believe Ryan Burnett comes out on top. But ultimately, I want to see this fight just to be sure. So again, Tete could jump up into the top 10 or top 15 or whatever, and Ryan Burnett could end up dropping out of it by losing to Tete. But we'll have to wait and see as to what Ryan Burnett does. But for me, he's impressed me enough to make it to number 7, purely because he come from nowhere and unified in quick succession. Now, I know not many people would have him on their top 10 pound for pound, but for me, as I said, everything is subjective, and that's what I've done. And number 6, Jarrett Hurd. Now, had I made this video yesterday or the day before, he probably wouldn't have even made it onto the top 10. But because he did manage to beat Lara and become a unified champion, then I can't not put him on the list, because first of all, he's undefeated, and second of all, he's had 5 fights in the last 2 years, and not only won his IBF title, but ended up adding the IBO and the WBA by beating Lara. Of course, when he won the title, he beat Tony Harrison for it, and then ended up going on and beating Austin Trout. Again, Austin Trout is a relatively decent name, but not somebody you go, wow, quality. Not at all. And Jarrett Hurd is a huge guy, and in theory should dominate this division. He really should. Now, again, honourable mentions within this division as well, and why they're not on my top 10 would be Jermell Charlo, because I'm still waiting for him to properly step up. And of course, there's talk about him taking on Austin Trout next. That is not going to put him on my personal top 10. But of course, if he was to go and fight, say, Jarrett Hurd or the winner of Saddam Ali and Liam Smith, then yes, he could quite comfortably make it. So for me, Jermell Charlo just needs that one stellar win to get into the mix of this lot anyway. So for me, Jermell Charlo doesn't make my top 10. But Jarrett Hurd does, because not only is he young-ish, in 27 years old, but he didn't just win the title and then defend it against journeyman or bum or whatever, or against low opposition. He actually stepped up and unified, and that gets big props for me. Again, Lara didn't make it on the list purely because he lost, and for the fact that again, he hasn't really been impressing me that much anyway. But Jarrett Hurd has been impressing me, so to get that win certainly puts him, for me, at number 6. But again, some of these ones, I mean, I'm quite happy to jig them around, move them to number 8, move them up to number 6, whatever, or 7, or 5, or whatever. But for me, just on my list now, Jarrett Hurd is number 6. And in at number 5 will be Triple G. Now, Triple G is a unified champion. It has been a unified champion for quite some time. And he does have some notable wins. Again, some maybe you can consider contentious, with the fact that he did fight Kell Brook. And obviously Kell Brook moves up 2 weight classes, but Kell Brook was undefeated at the time and a champion. And it's not like it's a huge weight jump, really, from 147 to 160, 13 pounds. It's a fair bit, I suppose, but Kell Brook has been saying that he could make that quite comfortably, and he did, and he looked good. Now, Triple G didn't look too great against Kell Brook. Kell Brook did light him up on a couple of occasions, to one point where Kell Brook gave Triple G an uppercut, and Triple G's feet actually left the floor. But ultimately, over the last 24 months, Triple G has fought 4 times, and it would actually be 5 times. Well, sorry, it will be 5 times soon when he fights on May the 5th. But in the last 24 months, he has taken on Dominic Wade, who was undefeated fighter, and beat the living hell out of him. See, a lot of people were picking, I remember back then, that a lot of people were picking Dominic Wade to beat Triple G. But ultimately, he came through that with flying colours. But again, some people say maybe it's too early for Dominic Wade. Now, just before then, he did beat David Lemieux. But David Lemieux, that was before the 24-month period, which is why I'm not really including that. And obviously, Kell Brook, undefeated fighter at the time with 36-0 and IBF welterweight champion. But he doesn't get too much props for the Kell Brook win, but still, he kind of does, if that makes sense. And again, honourable mention of Canelo. The reason why Canelo is not on my list is for a similar reason for the Kell Brook one. But whereas Kell Brook was undefeated and a champion, when Canelo brought up Amir Khan, he wasn't a champion, he wasn't undefeated, and everybody knew he was chinny. Not only that, Canelo went on and fought Chavez Jr., again weight drained him, and he also fought Liam Smith, who he cherry-picked to be the weaker champion of the 154. So again, Canelo gets no real props for that, and for the fact that he's currently under investigation for PEDs. Again, I can't say he did it, I can't say he didn't, but it's leaving a bit of a sour taste in my mouth with the fact that he's under investigation for it. Really, you are responsible for what goes in your own body, right? So again, Canelo has not made my top 10, but again, a draw with Triple G does, of course, give him some big props, but because that whole cloud over him right now, That's why I kind of left him off. But he is a quality fighter, no doubt, and I could quite easily fit him into the top 10 if it wasn't for this cloud over him. But again, keeping with Triple G, he beat Daniel Jacobs. And again, some people may say, well, Daniel Jacobs beat him. But ultimately, the records show that Triple G won. And when I watched it again, I agree with the decision. Triple G did win that fight. And of course, he dropped Daniel Jacobs as well early on in the fight. Now, Triple G is a unified champion. He's the IBF, IBO, WBA and WBC middleweight champion. Again, I'm going to give out another honourable mention for a guy that I nearly put on the top 10. I have to be perfectly honest, in Billy Joe Saunders, purely because over the last 2 fights, he has fought magnificently, almost to perfection, especially against David Lemieux. And of course, he was supposed to have a fight this month against Martin Murray. And he has been calling out Triple G. And Triple G sent the contract. Billy Joe Saunders signed it, sent it back, never heard nothing back. And that's because Triple G went and tried to get the lineal champion in Canelo. So again, Triple G gets big props for taking on the lineal champion in Canelo. Although Canelo hasn't really been fighting a middleweight too often, of course. But, you know, just by beating Miguel Cotto, he got that rank. And of course, money, of course. Why not? So Triple G isn't avoiding anybody, really. But I would love to see him fight Billy Joe Saunders. But again, Billy Joe Saunders, if he was to fight Triple G and beat Triple G, would definitely 100% get him in my top 10, no doubt about it. And of course, a draw with Saul Canelo Alvarez with Triple G. Beforehand, I had Triple G just winning that fight, but I was okay with a draw. But again, another reason why I don't really want to put Canelo on this list is because each time he fights, there seems to be some rogue judges here and there. So again, but with Triple G, he was quite willing to take the rematch. But of course, that rematch is now fell through, but he's keeping his date of May the 5th in Vegas with an opponent yet to be announced. But we'll have to wait and see what happens with that one. But for me, right now, Triple G is number 5. In at number 4, we have a 4-weight world champion in Mikey Garcia. Again, some people will say he shouldn't really be there because he's been cherry picking. I kind of get it, but again, I'm just looking over the last 2 years. Now, of course, he has been inactive before then, but over the last 2 years, when he come back after nearly, a year and a half, 2-year layoff, he took on Elio Rojas, who was 24 wins and 2 losses, and knocked him out in 5 rounds as well, and dropped him twice in rounds 3 and 5. So he dominated Rojas. And then straight after then, he didn't just kind of like take another tune up to kind of like I see where he is. He, of course, this is at 135, by the way. He takes on the WBC lightweight champion, if I can get the words out correctly. So 140 champion. I'll just stick with that. So 135 champion in Zlatikanin. Knocked him out in 3 rounds. Very, very impressive. And considering that Mike Garcia had come off from a long layoff as well, and not only did he only have 5 rounds against a previous opponent, but he come in there and dominated Zlatikanin and knocked him out in 3. Then straight after then, he moved up in weight, which is one of the reasons for pound, right? The fact that, you know, you can fluctuate between weights at times, or at some point in your career. Maybe for, say, Mike Garcia, you know, he was at a lower weight beforehand, and then he went to 135, won the title, then 140, and ultimately won the title as well against Linares in his last fight. It was by unanimous decision, but before then he did be a decent name in Adrian Broner. Adrian Broner has been on the slide over the last couple of years. He was once a quality fighter, but then just seemed to slip. But Mike Garcia did move up, and Adrian Broner was probably the favourite. I don't really remember too much, but he was arguably the favourite for that fight, right? And Mike Garcia didn't just beat him, but he dominated him quite comfortably, and again with Linares as well. So Mikey Garcia being a 4-weight world champion, and of course what he's achieved in the last 2 years, I have him as my number 4. But again, you know, some people may say, well, that's not really fair, and because there are other people around, and Mikey Garcia was cherry picked. And yeah, okay, maybe he did cherry pick Linares, maybe, and on the slide Adrian Broner. Yeah, okay, I mean, I can certainly argue with that, but fact is that he still has to get in there, move up in weight, and get the job done, and that's what he done. So, anyway, Mikey Garcia, number 4. Number 3, again, a little bit contentious here. I have Saw Rungvisai, or Srisaket Saw Rungvisai, of course. Now, most notably over his last 3 fights, he has looked pretty damn good. Obviously, a former pound for pound number 1, number 2, or number 3, depending on how you looked at it, in Roman Gonzalez. He beat him the first time round on points, and he was using dirty tactics. I'm not going to say he wasn't. And it was a close fight, and some people still had Gonzalez winning that fight, but ultimately the decision did go to Rungvisai, and he took Roman Gonzalez. Roman Gonzalez was 46-0 at the time, and he beat him. But ultimately, they had a rematch. Now, Rungvisai didn't have to give Roman Gonzalez a rematch, but he did, and he didn't just beat him again. He knocked that boy out in 4 rounds. So, you know, and it's not like it was just a once off. He just hit him once and he knocked him out. He knocked him out twice. Okay, and you know, just like in the first fight, he knocked down Roman Gonzalez in the first round anyway. And of course, Rungvisai got a point deducted in the first fight. But either way, no matter how you look at the first fight, second fight, Rungvisai not only was beating him, but he ultimately knocked him out, knocked him down twice in round number 4, ultimately finished him off. And he didn't just sit back and take on an easy fight for some big money, because obviously he became a bit of a name overnight, but he went and fought his mandatory in Juan Francisco Estrada. Estrada did have a couple of losses on his record at the time, but still people know him as a quality fighter. Now, bearing in mind where Rungvisai came from, where he was eating out of garbage cans for quite a while, living on the streets, and he was a former champion, but of course did lose that one. Now, if I was to look back over the last 2 years, again, you could probably argue that 3 of those opponents he shouldn't have really been in there with, because according to BoxRec, they were debut fights for these guys. So really, they were ultimate cherry picks, maybe just to help him with the rankings. But ultimately, he did take on Roman Gonzalez and beat him twice, and of course done his mandatory in Estrada. So for me, Srisaket Saw Rungvisai gets number 3 position in my pound for pound list. In at number 2, again, this is where we're going to get a little bit contentious with some things. And we have Terence Crawford is my number 2. And by me saying that, you pretty much know who my number 1 is going to be. But we're going to get there anyway. And Terence Crawford is number 2. A lot of it is because he was, in fact, the undisputed 140-pound champion. Which, again, is one hell of an achievement. But the thing is, though, is that the opponents that he beat, for me, weren't quite good enough. Now, it's not really his fault that 140-pound division is not exactly a popping, real big division. But now, had he have beaten the likes of Adrian Broner beforehand, he'll get a lot more praise from me than what he currently does. But, you know, beating Victor Postol was arguably his biggest win, who was undefeated, of course. And a lot of people were picking Postol to beat him, but Terence Crawford did, of course, do that. And this was within the last 2-year period as well. But then he went and fought John Molina Jr. Again, I mean, you know, he had 6 losses, so you don't get much praise for that one. Now, straight after when he did fight Felix Diaz, who was a relatively decent opponent. But, I mean, of course, he had lost once before himself, Diaz, but, you know, it's not really a real stellar name. But again, 140, you really be hard pushed to find him. And of course, Michael Garcia wasn't in the division then. Some argue Michael Garcia was waiting for Terence Crawford to move up before he moved in there. But for me, I think when he became undisputed against Julius Indongo, okay, Julius Indongo was undefeated, but again, if you look at his resume, not exactly stellar. And it's not like Terence Crawford has to do what people expect Keith Thurman to do, or Anthony Joshua, which is go around and collect up 1 belt at a time. For Terence Crawford, you know, to become undisputed, he had 2 belts against Julius Indongo's 2 belts, and then became undisputed for that 1 fight. I mean, of course, he did collect his first 2 belts one by one, of course. So it took him three title fights, if you like, to become undisputed. But still, Julius Indongo is a relatively decent fighter, but by the looks of it, he came in just to lay down. He came there for the payday and was severely overrated. And you could probably argue that Indongo's best opponent was Ricky Burns. Obviously, me being British, I know you know, quite a bit about Ricky Burns. And while Ricky Burns is decent, he's certainly not top dog, and he never really was, to be honest. And of course, Terence Crawford also beat Ricky Burns as well, so that is what it is. But for being undisputed, you do, of course, get some big props. Which likewise, if we go back down again where I said about Usyk and Gassiev, again, the winners would be on my list, propelled quite high. Now, one of the reasons why I didn't put Terence Crawford as top, not only because he hasn't really been fighting real stellar opposition, is because he was undisputed when he moved up. I think he pretty much had a choice of which sanctioning body would he be slotting into as mandatory. So of course he had the choice out of all four of them, and he chose what he considered to be the weakest one, which is Jeff Horn. Now, had he have chosen Keith Thurman or Errol Spence, he'll get a lot more praise for that. But it does seem that he's seen Jeff Horn as the weaker one, and that's why he's going for it. Now, that's not to say that Jeff Horn can't beat him or isn't going to beat him. But again, honourable mention, Jeff Horn, of course, not only did he beat Manny Pacquiao, but he defended it against Gary Corcoran as well. Obviously, I know a little bit about Corcoran, being that he's British. And the winner of Jeff Horn and Terence Crawford could change quite a bit. So Jeff Horn could leapfrog right the way up in this list. Now, I'm not going to say Jeff Horn, by beating Terence Crawford, becomes my number 2. Not at all. But purely because maybe 147 might be a step too far for Terence Crawford. Maybe, arguably. But either way, for me, he picked what he sees as the weaker champion. Jeff Horn may not be the weaker champion. Jeff Horn may actually be better than Keith Thurman. He may actually be better than Errol Spence. But ultimately, time is going to tell for a lot of that. Now, in at number 1, of course, you know it was coming, is Vasyl Lomachenko. Vasyl Lomachenko is the Matrix. He is an awesome fighter, and taking on the top guys around him as well. And of course, his next fight, again, he's moving up in weight against Jorge Linares. Before then, he made out of, I mean, again, we're going back for my 2-year period. So in the last 2 years, he fought 5 times. The last 4 of those, he made them quit, which is Nicholas Walters, Jason Sosa, Mariaga, and then Rigondeaux. Again, Rigondeaux was an undefeated fighter, where a lot of people were saying that, you know, he's the best thing ever. And he may well have been, but again, Rigondeaux, a bit of an honourable mention if you like, but again, Rigondeaux didn't really fight the best around him. Not always his fault, because the likes of, who obviously I really like, in Carl Frampton, Scott Quigg, actually moved up in weight to avoid him. That's just my opinion, and I'm sure a lot of people share that opinion as well, but obviously some of you won't be. But Rigondeaux hasn't exactly fought the best around and only has 17 wins, but still, a lot of people would say that he is quality, and a lot of people saying that Lomachenko was avoiding him. So he said, okay then, let's have it on. Rigondeaux did move up in weight, of course, to fight him. And again, you could probably argue the whole weight bully thing, but still, people were still saying Rigondeaux was going to beat him by moving up. Then suddenly he did. And then people say, well, Lomachenko's a weight bully. So, you know, you can't have your cake and eat it. So you can't say Lomachenko is avoiding Rigondeaux, and then when he fights him, even though you guys were still picking him to win, and then when he wins, then take that win away from him. You can't really do that. Mariaga, again, you know, he made him quit, and Jason Sosa quit, and Nicholas Walters was undefeated. Now, of course, Lomachenko does have a loss on his record, but again, not within the last 2 years. And of course, he's been moving up in weight as well. So again, isn't this what pound for pound is all about? About moving up in weight. I'm not saying that you have to move up in weight, but I'm saying that, for example, like Triple G, okay, he fights at 160. For me, there's no real reason why he could potentially not make 154 and fight the best there, or fight at 168 and fight the best there. Then ultimately we kind of see really where Triple G is at. I mean, it might be a bit of a tall order. I mean, maybe he would really struggle to make 154. I don't know. I'm just pulling his name as an example, but hopefully you kind of get what I'm saying. Whereas Lomachenko is actually moving up in weight, and not only that, for his next fight, which is on the 12th of May, he's taken on Jorge Linares. Again, Jorge Linares is an honourable mention, but of course, while he does get credit for 2 wins over Anthony Crolla, and of course Luke Campbell as well, again, Anthony Crolla, you would never really have put him in a top 20 pound for pound, as good as what he is. But Linares, while he has been looking good, and I do like him a lot, and I wouldn't put it past Linares to beat Lomachenko, I really wouldn't. So a win for Linares over Lomachenko would certainly propel him quite high, added to the fact that he has beat Anthony Collar, who is a very good opponent, and of course Campbell. But again, some people had Campbell as winning that fight. So again, a lot of it is all opinion based, of course. So, you know, a lot of my list can change because like I said, some of these fights are still yet to happen, with the likes of the cruiserweight tournament, Usyk and Gassiev. Also, honourable mentions, George Grosz, who has not only become a champion after 3 failed attempts, but he became a champion within the last 2 years, of course, and has beaten some pretty decent guys. I mean, Jamie Cox was an undefeated fighter. You had Chris Eubank Jr. A lot of people were picking him to win the tournament, and then suddenly, because George Grosz beats him, suddenly Chris Eubank Jr. wasn't that good. But we all know Chris Eubank Jr. is very, very good. He is just missing a few fundamentals of boxing, of course. But George Grosz is taking on undefeated fighter next in the final of Callum Smith. Callum Smith, again, a win over George Grosz may actually move him up because he's won the tournament. Okay, he's not a unified champion, but he has collected a couple of belts along the way. Technically, George Grosz is a unified champion if you were to include the IBO. But for the purpose of this, we're not going to do that. So again, George Grosz does get an honourable mention. Linares and Jeff Horn, as I've already said. Now, Kovalev, he does get an honourable mention because Sergey Kovalev, the only 2 losses that he's had within this period of 2 years, he has had 5 fights in the last 2 years, but he did lose 2 of them. One of them you could probably argue against Andre Ward the first time round, but second time round, again, you could probably argue that Andre Ward was cheating, but either way, you know, I mean, the records show that Kovalev lost on both occasions. So what's he done since? Had he went straight after one of the, I don't know, Adonis Stevenson or something like that, he'd probably get a bit more credit, especially by not only facing him, but winning as well. That would have been something, but he hasn't really done that, really. Again, he just kind of like eked his way through since. And yes, he did lose against arguably the pound for pound #1. So again, if people have Kovalev on their top 10, I don't really have an issue with it, considering that his only losses were against arguably the pound for pound best, right, in Andre Ward. As a lot of people were picking it, pound for pound #1 versus pound for pound #2, right? So either way, but for me, Kovalev just hasn't quite done enough. But hopefully we're going to get to see him potentially fight the winner of Stevenson and Jack, or maybe Dmitry Bivol, or Beterbiev, or something like that. We really have to wait and see. But I think for me, he just doesn't make my top 10 for Kovalev, just purely for that reason. And again, with Stevenson and Jack, now Stevenson, he's only fought twice, so wouldn't have made the list anyway. Now, that's not to say he's not a top 10 pound for pound fighter. And a lot of these guys, it's not to say that they're not. It's just that, again, I'm basing it on the last 2 years of the fact that he's only had 2 fights. Again, a lot of it may not be his fault. Maybe because of opponents pulling out or couldn't get the fights. I get all that. But of course, he is taking on Badou Jack. Now, Badou Jack hasn't quite made my top 10 list either, because he does have a draw on there with James DeGale. And of course, before then, didn't look too good either. But either way, a win for either Stevenson or Jack, I would quite happily put the winner of those right up there. No doubt about it. So again, I'm waiting for that kind of fight to kind of see what happens. Again, some other mentions, maybe Bivol, but maybe it's a bit too early. Potentially, maybe, I don't know. Maybe, we'll have to wait and see. But hopefully, we'll get to see the likes of Beterbiev and Bivol have a fight, and really kind of get to see where they are. Then hopefully move forward to an undisputed, which is one of my things about Andre Ward, the fact that he retired rather than take on Adonis Stevenson. I would love to have seen undisputed for there. Again, David Benavidez as well. Very, very good, but ultimately we really have to wait and see. But if some people have him on their list, again, I'm quite happy with that one. You know, I really have no issues with that. Kana Islam, for me, is the best 154 fighter outside of the champions, and potentially could be the best, but I really need to wait and see for him to fight one of the champions to see how good Khanat Islam is. And I really do like Khanat Islam. I do rate him very, very highly. Keith Thurman, again, had he been a bit more active, I have no issues putting him on top 10 at all. He is a unified WBC, WBA champion after back-to-back victories over Sean Porter and Danny Garcia. So, certainly, but purely for my criteria of at least 3 fights in the last 2 years, I don't think that's too much to ask for. Only 2 fights for him. That's why he's not on my list. Now, that's not to say that he can't beat Errol Spence. That's not to say that he can't beat Terence Crawford or Jeff Horn. But just purely for inactivity. And one of the reasons are, as I said earlier, I don't know how good that these guys are going to be now compared to what they were maybe 3 years ago when they were on top of their game. Or like Keith Thurman was, 2 back-to-back wins like that. Certainly gets him a lot of points, but just due to inactivity, again, injury, not really his fault. Or maybe it was his fault, I don't know. Maybe he's just acting. We don't know. But inactivity keeps him off the list. Again, Jeff Horn, I've already said, so him beating Manny Pacquiao is great points, of course. And, of course, defending it against Corcoran is good points. But ultimately, the next fight, I need to wait and see what happens with Terence Crawford. I really do. With Terry Flanagan, again, some people may have him on there. And, obviously, he's going to be fighting Maurice Hooker real soon as well. So that'll put him right up there. Obviously, he's just moving up in weight. Again, this is what pound for pound is about, right? At times. Robert Easter Jr., again, he's just not doing enough for me to break into it. But again, some people will have him on there, and I have no issues with that one. Just like Oscar Valdez. And again, he gets big props for beating Scott Quigg in the way that he did as well. I mean, that was an absolute brutal war. That was one hell of a fight. That's a fight I could quite happily watch again. Scott Quigg was the bigger guy. He missed weight on the scales, and a former champion, of course, and only lost to Carl Frampton. And the way that Oscar Valdez beat him was phenomenal. And I'm a huge Scott Quigg fan. You all know that one. And keeping with that kind of theme as well, Leo Santa Cruz and Carl Frampton didn't quite make my list purely because they both have a loss. Yes, they did lose against each other. So again, it does kind of cancel it out with the fact that they didn't just lose to anybody. They did lose to top opposition, and again against each other. And Santa Cruz against Mares, again, that one's coming up. And of course, Carl Frampton taking on Donaire. So things could change quite rapidly depending on not only them getting the result, but how they do it as well. Obviously helps. Tete, again, we've already covered. I do believe that he might be able to beat Ryan Burnett, but it's just my opinion that Ryan Burnett would beat him. It really, really is. But again, I need more from Tete to even put him on there. And Cal Yafai, again, I'm going to kind of contradict myself a little bit on here. Cal Yafai, he has fought 5 times in the last 2 years, but not really against the best of opposition. Now, I believe he could potentially beat Roman Gonzalez. I do believe he could potentially beat Sor Versailles, but I need to see it to put him on there, if that makes sense. So just based on me believing it, and again, I know it's contradiction with the fact that I said about Ryan Burnett and Zolani Tete, but with Cal Yafai, while I do believe he can beat them, I'm not confident that he would definitely beat Sor Versailles, or he would definitely beat Roman Gonzalez, or any other guy around there. So for now, I need to see it. I really do. Inoue, again, he's coming up against Jamie McDonnell real soon, who I rate very, very highly, Jamie McDonnell. So we'll really have to wait and see how Inoue does. Obviously, he just moved up in weight as well. So again, even then, with a win over Jamie McDonnell, would he make my top 10? Maybe. Depends how he does it. But again, I'm kind of fancying Jamie McDonnell to do it, although he is going into the lines then by going over to Inoue's back garden. So again, I'm not too sure how that's going to go. I really need to wait and see how that fight turns out to make any kind of judgment. So again, with Moontree as well, 49-0, but because again, I don't know enough about the guys around him, and the fact that he has only been fighting 6-rounders as well at times. He is WBC champion and has one hell of a record of 49-0. But as we've seen through some other champions as well, it's quite easy to keep your 0 if you cherry pick your opponents. And I believe that's what Moonstree's doing, although I don't really know for sure. And of course, there are some other names that I haven't mentioned purely because I don't know enough about them. So again, while my list is probably not really to your taste, I know this video's gone on for quite a while, but just based on what I know, this is my list. So I'll just quickly go through them real quick, which is I have number 10 Gassiev, number 9 Usyk, number 8 Errol Spence Jr, number 7 Ryan Burnett, number 6 Jarrett Hurd, number 5 Gennady Golovkin, number 4 Mikey Garcia, number 3 Sora Rungvisai, number 2 Terence Crawford, number 1 Vasyl Lomachenko. But as I said, a lot of these things could change quite easily and very, very quickly over the next couple of weeks to month or two. So drop your thoughts below. Sean Newton, go easy on me, and I'll catch you all in the next video, and of course subscribe as well. See you later.